Announcing a major bust in Bay Area retail crime. Attorney General Rob Bonta announced 5 people have pleaded guilty to several felonies in what he says is one of the largest organized retail theft rings in state history.
4:37 a.m. Minneapolis, Minnesota. The temperature hovered at 8 degrees below zero. Ice crystals formed on the windows of unmarked federal vehicles parked along Cedar Avenue. Inside those vehicles sat 41 agents from the FBI, IC, and the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. They had spent 22 months building this case. They had traced financial networks across 6 continents. They had followed digital breadcrumbs through encrypted servers in Mogadishu, Dubai, London, and Toronto. And now, in the frozen darkness of a Minneapolis neighborhood, they were about to dismantle a $5 billion fraud empire that had turned America's child care system into a cartel money laundering operation. The target was a building on the 3100 block of Pillsbury Avenue. State records identified it as the Bright Futures Early Learning Center, a licensed daycare facility serving vulnerable families. According to enrollment data maintained by Minnesota's Department of Human Services, this single location cared for 412 children daily. Federal and state subsidies had deposited $78 million into its accounts over 18 months. But when agents breached the entrance at 4:44 a.m., they found something else entirely. No children, no staff, no life. The building was immaculate. Plastic chairs arranged in perfect rows. Educational posters on walls that had never been touched. A reception desk holding intake forms filled with careful handwriting. Each form documented a child who had never existed. Each signature belonged to a parent who was never real. The lead agent walked through empty classrooms, cribs with factory-wrapped mattresses, toy bins overflowing with items still sealed in packaging. A chalkboard displayed the alphabet in bright colors. The chalk had never been used. Dust sat undisturbed on every surface. This wasn't neglect. This was theater. If you want the full truth about what federal agents found inside, hit like so this story reaches more people who need to know. In the back office, investigators discovered the command center. Filing cabinets contained dossiers on more than 1,100 fabricated children. Social security numbers, birth certificates, immunization records, parent signatures. Every document was fake. The social security numbers had been purchased from identity brokers operating on dark web marketplaces for an average of $40 each. The birth certificates had been manufactured using templates stolen from county clerk offices in 4 different states. The signatures had been generated by machine learning algorithms trained to replicate human handwriting with statistical variation. This wasn't amateur hour. This was industrial-scale identity synthesis operated with corporate precision. But the real shock waited behind a reinforced steel door in the director's private office. When forensic technicians cut through the lock, they found $53 million in cash, bundled in vacuum-sealed bags, stacked floor to ceiling. Sitting on top of the money were 4 encrypted satellite phones, a leather-bound ledger written entirely in code, and a single photograph that changed everything. The photo showed the facility's director standing beside a man whose face triggered immediate recognition in federal databases. That man was Rodrigo Mendez Valencia, a senior logistics coordinator for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, one of the most violent and sophisticated drug trafficking organizations in the Western Hemisphere. His network moved fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine across North America. His operations generated billions annually. His organization had been responsible for the deaths of thousands. And now federal agents understood what they were looking at. This wasn't welfare fraud. This wasn't bureaucratic exploitation. This was a cartel money laundering terminal embedded directly into the American social safety net, funded by taxpayer dollars, operated under the protection of state licensing, hidden behind the facade of helping children. The director of Bright Futures Early Learning Center was a 48-year-old woman named Halima Osman Warfa. State records showed she had operated child care facilities in Minneapolis for 14 years. She served on nonprofit boards. She had been photographed with state senators at community events. She had received awards from the mayor's office for contributions to early childhood education. None of it was real. Halima Osman Warfa was a constructed identity, created 9 years earlier using documents purchased from a forger operating in Nairobi. The woman behind the name had entered the United States on a tourist visa in 2015. She never left. She had no formal education, no background in child development, no legitimate credentials. What she had was a relationship with people who understood how to exploit gaps in American oversight, and a direct line to cartel financial operations. By 11 a.m., federal analysts had begun tracing the money flows. What they discovered was a financial labyrinth spanning 47 countries. Funds deposited into daycare accounts were immediately transferred to shell companies registered in Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada. States with minimal corporate transparency requirements. States where anyone could register a company with almost no questions asked. From there, the money moved to intermediary accounts in the Cayman Islands, then to the United Arab Emirates, then to Kenya. The final destination was a network of accounts controlled by cartel-affiliated entities in Jalisco, Mexico. The operation had a code name buried in encrypted files. Project Lighthouse. The name was darkly ironic. This network had been designed to guide billions through darkness, away from legitimate recipients, away from children who needed care, straight into the hands of cartel leadership. The scale was staggering. Between 2019 and 2025, Project Lighthouse had processed more than $5 billion in fraudulent child care subsidies. The network operated across 73 facilities in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, Arizona, and Michigan. The money had funded cartel operations across 2 continents. It had purchased precursor chemicals for fentanyl production in Sinaloa. It had bribed port officials in Long Beach, Houston, and Baltimore. It had financed the construction of drug tunnels beneath the Arizona border. It had paid for encrypted communication systems. It had funded weapons purchases. It had paid off law enforcement officers across multiple states. Comment exposed below if you believe this level of corruption demands immediate accountability. At the center of the financial architecture, investigators found something that transformed the investigation from criminal fraud into political catastrophe. The encrypted authorization protocols embedded in Project Lighthouse's system required approval from a single individual for any transfer exceeding $7 million. That individual was identified only by a code name in the system, Director North. When analysts cross-referenced the digital signature associated with Director North against federal databases, they found a match within hours. The signature belonged to a laptop registered to Gerald Thorson, the Minnesota Commissioner of Children and Families, a political appointee who had served in state government for 24 years. Gerald Thorson had overseen the expansion of Minnesota's child care subsidy program from $400 million annually to more than $2.3 billion. He had championed accessibility reforms that reduced verification requirements in the name of helping working families. He had personally signed off on licensing applications for 37 of the facilities now identified as fraudulent operations. And according to encrypted financial records recovered from Project Lighthouse servers, he had received more than $21 million in payments. The money had been routed through a trust fund registered in his wife's maiden name. The payments had arrived in increments small enough to avoid automatic reporting triggers. Deposits of $9,800, then $9,500, then $9,900. Always just under the $10,000 threshold that required banks to file currency transaction reports. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't oversight failure. This was command-level collusion between a senior state official and a transnational drug cartel. Gerald Thorson had transformed Minnesota's child care system into a money laundering operation. He had weaponized compassion. He had turned the social safety net into an ATM for criminal organizations. He had betrayed every family that trusted the system, every child that needed care, every taxpayer that funded the programs. At 1:47 a.m. the following morning, a federal command center activated in downtown Minneapolis. The facility was a converted warehouse that had been transformed into a joint operations hub. FBI, ICE, DEA, DHS, U.S. Marshals, State Police. On the main wall hung a digital map of the Upper Midwest. Red markers pulsed across the screen, each one representing a confirmed node in the Project Lighthouse network. 73 facilities total, spread across 5 states. 39 were in Minnesota, 21 were in Wisconsin, 8 were in Ohio, 3 were in Arizona, 2 were in Michigan. The scope was unprecedented. This wasn't a local problem. This was regional infrastructure built to siphon billions from American taxpayers. At 4:15 a.m., the operation began. More than 900 federal agents mobilized simultaneously across all 5 states. In Minneapolis alone, 28 SWAT teams breached facilities within a 2-hour window. Black Hawk helicopters provided aerial surveillance. Armored vehicles blocked escape routes. ICE agents coordinated with state police to establish checkpoints on major highways. The cartel had built a fortress inside America's welfare system. Now the federal government was tearing it down brick by brick. If this shocks you, hit like now so more people understand what's happening in their communities. The raids yielded immediate results. At a facility in St. Paul, agents discovered a basement converted into a currency counting operation. 17 workers sat at long tables sorting and banding cash that arrived in duffel bags from across the region. The total recovered from that single location exceeded $28 million. In Milwaukee, investigators breached a facility that state records showed as caring for 387 children. The building was empty except for a server room, encrypted hard drives, satellite communication equipment, financial terminals connected to networks spanning 3 continents. In Columbus, agents found a facility operating as a front for human trafficking. 19 individuals were discovered in a hidden room behind a false wall, including 6 minors. They had been transported from Central America through cartel-controlled routes. They were being held for labor exploitation. But the most significant discovery came from a property outside Rochester, Minnesota. State records showed the address as an agricultural supply warehouse. No connection to childcare. But utility records told a different story. The facility consumed more electricity than a small hospital. Water usage exceeded 120,000 gallons per week. When tactical teams breached the building at 5:52 a.m., they found a fully operational drug manufacturing facility. The production floor spanned 3 levels. Conveyor belts moved product through automated packaging systems. Chemical vats produced fentanyl precursors at industrial scale. The facility was producing an estimated 47 tons of fentanyl per month, enough to kill every person in North America multiple times over. The funding for this operation came directly from Project Lighthouse. Stolen child care subsidies had been laundered through shell companies and used to purchase precursor chemicals, to buy manufacturing equipment, to pay chemists, to bribe inspectors, to ensure silence from everyone who might have asked questions. The cartel had built a closed loop: steal from the government, wash the money, produce the drugs, destroy the communities, use the chaos to steal more. It was elegant in its brutality, industrial in its scope. By noon, the scale of the arrests became clear. More than 340 individuals had been taken into federal custody across the 5-state region. Among them were facility directors, accountants, identity forgers, cartel logistics coordinators, and corrupt public officials. Gerald Thorson was arrested at his lakeside cabin in northern Minnesota. He offered no resistance. He asked if he could finish his coffee before being handcuffed. Investigators later found he had been preparing to flee the country. His passport was in his jacket pocket. A one-way ticket to Morocco sat on his kitchen counter. Departure scheduled for that afternoon. Type yes if you're ready to see how deep the corruption actually goes inside state government. But the corruption extended far beyond a single commissioner. As investigators examined seized servers and financial records, they discovered that Project Lighthouse had compromised dozens of individuals within Minnesota's state government. 17 employees of the Department of Human Services had received payments for expediting license approvals, payments ranging from $15,000 to $120,000 per approval. 8 county inspectors had accepted bribes to overlook obvious signs of fraud during facility visits, bribes totaling more than $2.3 million over 4 years. 4 state legislators had received campaign contributions from shell companies linked to the network, contributions totaling $780,000 during the previous election cycle. The cartel hadn't just exploited the system, it had infiltrated it. It had turned bureaucrats into accomplices. It had transformed regulators into enablers. It had purchased legislators like commodities. One veteran fraud investigator with the Inspector General's office sat in the command center staring at the network diagram on the wall. He had spent 19 years tracking welfare fraud. He had seen schemes large and small, but nothing had prepared him for this. He turned to his supervisor and said something that would later appear in the official report. He said this wasn't corruption, it was colonization. The cartel had colonized American social services and turned them into revenue streams for drug trafficking and money laundering. The investigation into law enforcement complicity began within hours of the initial raids. Federal analysts examined patrol records, communication logs, internal emails from agencies across the region. What they found was systematic compromise. 21 officers from the Minneapolis Police Department had received payments from accounts linked to Project Lighthouse. The payments were disguised as consulting fees for security assessments that never occurred. In exchange, these officers had provided advance warning of compliance inspections. They had altered patrol routes to avoid facilities during critical transfer periods. They had leaked information about ongoing investigations. The rot extended to federal agencies. 4 ICE officers stationed in Minnesota had been receiving payments for more than 5 years. Their role was simple but devastating. They identified individuals within immigrant communities who could be coerced into participating in the fraud scheme. They used their authority to threaten deportation against anyone who refused to cooperate. They transformed immigration enforcement into a recruitment tool for the cartel. One honest agent broke down during her interview with internal affairs investigators. She had suspected something was wrong for years. She had filed reports about irregularities in her colleagues' behavior. Those reports had been buried. She had been transferred to administrative duties. She had been told her concerns were unfounded. Now she understood that the people burying her reports were themselves on the payroll. She said she had joined the agency to protect the country. Instead, she had watched it be sold piece by piece. Share this so more communities understand how deep the betrayal goes inside institutions meant to protect us. At 6 p.m., the Justice Department convened an emergency briefing for congressional leadership. The confirmed financial loss to American taxpayers stood at $5.3 billion. That figure represented child care subsidies stolen from families who needed them. It represented drug prevention programs that had been defunded because money had been diverted. It represented the future of children who had been abandoned by a system designed to protect them. But the human cost could not be measured in dollars. Investigators estimated that fentanyl produced by the Rochester facility had been responsible for more than 16,000 overdose deaths across the Midwest over 3 years. Each of those deaths had a name. Each had a family. Each had been someone's child, someone's parent, someone's friend. The stolen money had been converted into poison and distributed through communities already struggling. The cartel had used America's compassion to fund America's destruction. The investigation revealed one final layer that transformed the case from regional corruption into a national security emergency. Among files recovered from Gerald Thorson's personal devices, analysts discovered communications with individuals operating in East Africa and the Middle East. The money flowing through Project Lighthouse had not been used exclusively for drug production. A portion of the funds, an estimated $840 million, had been diverted to organizations with suspected ties to extremist networks operating in Somalia and Yemen. The daycare fraud had become a terrorism financing pipeline. American taxpayer dollars intended to help children had been laundered through cartel networks and delivered to groups that wished harm upon the United States. The system had been turned inside out. The safety net had become a weapon pointed at the people it was meant to protect. At 10 p.m., federal prosecutors announced that charges would be filed against 231 individuals. The charges ranged from wire fraud and money laundering to drug trafficking, human trafficking, and material support for terrorism. Gerald Thorson faced a potential sentence of life in prison without parole. Halima Osman Warfa remained at large, believed to have fled the country through a network of cartel-controlled transit points. An international arrest warrant had been issued through Interpol. If you believe justice must reach every level of this conspiracy, comment justice below. The facilities are closed now. The servers have been seized. The money has been frozen in accounts across 14 countries. But the damage cannot be undone. The children who lost access to legitimate childcare because funds were diverted to fraud cannot get those years back. The families destroyed by fentanyl cannot be made whole. The communities devastated by cartel violence cannot rebuild trust overnight. The trust that communities placed in institutions designed to help them has been shattered. This case forces a reckoning with vulnerabilities embedded in American social programs. For decades, the priority has been accessibility, getting money to people quickly, with minimal barriers. That compassion was weaponized. The cartel understood that bureaucracies are afraid to ask hard questions. They understood that efficiency often means reduced verification. They understood that political correctness could be exploited to avoid scrutiny. They built an empire on those weaknesses. The investigation into Project Lighthouse proved that the most dangerous threats do not always announce themselves with violence. Sometimes they arrive wearing the clothing of community leaders. Sometimes they fill out paperwork and attend ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Sometimes they collect commendations from mayors. Sometimes they smile at cameras while stealing the future from beneath our feet. The factory in Rochester has been demolished. The network has been dismantled. Gerald Thorson sits in a federal detention facility awaiting trial. But the question echoes across every state in America. How many other facilities are operating right now, collecting millions while children go without? How many other systems have been colonized by organizations that wish US harm? How many other Gerald Thorsons are sitting in state offices right now, signing approvals, collecting payments, betraying the public trust? Hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next as this investigation continues to expand. This story is a warning that power does not always require violence. Sometimes it only requires patience. Sometimes it only requires finding the gaps in systems built on trust and exploiting them until there is nothing left. The cartel did not need to invade America with armies. They simply needed to fill out the right forms, to smile at the right meetings, to make the right campaign contributions, to pay the right officials. They turned compassion into corruption. They turned childcare into cartel funding. They turned the American dream into a money laundering nightmare. Federal investigators continue to trace additional connections across the country. They believe Project Lighthouse may have extended into at least 6 more states. They believe the total financial damage may exceed $7 billion. They believe dozens of additional public officials may have been compromised. The threat is not always visible. The enemy does not always wear a uniform. Sometimes the enemy wears a suit and sits in a government office. Sometimes the enemy operates a daycare that never cared for a single child. Sometimes the enemy hides behind good intentions while funneling billions to cartels and terrorist networks. If you believe we need a complete audit of every social program in America, comment audit below and share this video before it gets buried. The investigation revealed that the sophistication of Project Lighthouse went beyond anything federal agents had encountered. The network utilized artificial intelligence to generate fraudulent documentation. Machine learning algorithms created attendance records with realistic patterns of absence and presence. Natural language processing generated parent communications that mimicked authentic concerns and questions. Deepfake technology had been used to create video footage of facility tours for compliance reviews. Computer-generated imagery produced photographs of children that never existed. Biometric spoofing defeated fingerprint verification systems. This was not traditional fraud. This was next-generation criminal enterprise leveraging cutting-edge technology to exploit government systems designed decades before such capabilities existed. The Minnesota Department of Human Services had been conducting compliance reviews using protocols developed in 2008. They were checking for paperwork accuracy. Meanwhile, the cartel was using artificial intelligence developed in 2024 to generate that paperwork with perfect authenticity. The government was bringing a pencil to a cyber war. If this makes you angry about how unprepared our systems are, hit like and comment your reaction below. Among the most disturbing discoveries was evidence that Project Lighthouse had been recruiting individuals from within refugee communities. The cartel specifically targeted Somali immigrants in Minneapolis. Many had arrived seeking safety, seeking opportunity, seeking the American promise of a better life. Instead, they found predators. Cartel recruiters approached vulnerable individuals with offers of employment, of income that could support entire families, of security in an uncertain world. Those who accepted found themselves trapped in a criminal enterprise they couldn't escape. Those who refused faced threats against themselves, against their families, against relatives still living in East Africa. The cartel had weaponized the immigrant experience. They had turned desperation into leverage. They had exploited the very vulnerabilities that American refugee programs were designed to protect against. Federal agents interviewed 47 individuals who had been coerced into participating in various aspects of the fraud network. Their stories revealed systematic manipulation, threats of deportation, threats of violence, promises of legal immigration status that never materialized, debt bondage schemes that kept them working for the network even after they wanted out. One woman described how she had been told her job was simply to sign paperwork. She thought she was helping process legitimate applications. She didn't realize until months later that she was signing enrollment forms for children who didn't exist. By then she had been told that she was already implicated, that if she went to authorities, she would be arrested alongside everyone else, that her own children would be taken from her. She stayed silent for 3 years, living with guilt, living with fear, living with the knowledge that her signature was being used to steal millions from programs meant to help people like her. The factories are dismantled, the servers are seized, but questions remain that cannot be answered with raids and arrests alone. How did this network operate for 6 years without detection? How did 73 facilities receive licensing approval despite operating as obvious frauds? How did billions flow through the banking system without triggering meaningful investigation? The answer lies in systematic failure across multiple layers of oversight. State licensing agencies were understaffed and overwhelmed. Minnesota employed 47 inspectors to monitor more than 11,000 child care facilities across the state. Each inspector was responsible for reviewing more than 200 facilities annually. Site visits lasted an average of 90 minutes. Inspectors checked for basic safety compliance. They verified paperwork. They rarely investigated deeper. Federal banking regulations required reports for individual transactions exceeding $10,000, but they did not aggregate smaller transactions across multiple accounts. Project Lighthouse structured deposits to stay below reporting thresholds. They spread transactions across dozens of financial institutions. No single bank saw the full picture. State and federal databases did not communicate effectively. A facility flagged for suspicious activity in Minnesota might operate freely in Wisconsin because the warning never crossed state lines. Information sharing protocols were outdated. Privacy protections designed to safeguard personal data inadvertently created blind spots that sophisticated criminals exploited. The system was not broken by accident. It was broken by design, by decades of underfunding oversight agencies, by prioritizing speed over verification, by assuming that people operating daycares must have good intentions, by being unwilling to ask hard questions for fear of appearing discriminatory. Project Lighthouse succeeded because it understood that compassion could be weaponized, that trust could be exploited, that systems built on good faith assumptions would struggle to detect bad faith actors. If you want accountability for every official who enabled this through negligence or corruption, type accountability in the comments. This story demands that we confront uncomfortable truths about American institutions, about the gaps between policy and practice, about the distance between what we claim our systems do and what they actually accomplish, about who pays the price when systems fail. The children who needed care didn't get it because money meant for them funded cartel operations instead. The families who relied on subsidies found their benefits denied or delayed because fraud consumed resources meant for legitimate need. The communities devastated by fentanyl paid with their lives for a drug pipeline funded by stolen taxpayer dollars. The damage spreads through society like cracks through ice, spreading outward, reaching further than anyone first realizes, weakening foundations we thought were solid. When those in power betray the public trust, when institutions designed to protect become vehicles for exploitation, when the safety net transforms into a criminal enterprise, the damage extends beyond any single victim or community. It erodes faith in government itself. It makes people question whether any system can be trusted. It creates cynicism that corrodes civic participation. It hands ammunition to those who argue that all social programs are wasteful or corrupt. The investigation continues. Federal agents are pursuing leads across 12 countries. Interpol has issued red notices for 47 individuals believed to be involved in Project Lighthouse operations. Financial institutions have frozen more than $3 billion in assets tied to the network. But Halima Osman Warfa remains at large. Last confirmed sighting placed her in Nairobi 3 days after the initial Minneapolis raids. Intelligence suggests she may have fled to the Middle East. She has resources. She has connections. She has every incentive to disappear. Whether she will ever face justice remains an open question. What is certain is that the systems she exploited remain vulnerable, that other networks may be operating right now, that the lessons of Project Lighthouse must drive fundamental reform in how America manages social programs, in how we verify identity, in how we track money flows, in how we detect and disrupt sophisticated fraud. The fight continues. The threat persists. The need for vigilance never ends. Hit like if you believe justice is worth fighting for. Comment below with your thoughts on what should happen to every person involved in this conspiracy. Subscribe so you don't miss updates as this case develops. Share this story so more people understand what happened and why it matters. Remember that the threat is not always visible, that enemies do not always announce themselves, that sometimes the greatest danger comes wrapped in bureaucratic forms and community awards and smiling photographs with elected officials. Stay vigilant, stay informed, demand accountability. This story is not over.